All right, I'm in the middle of a renovation, and that means I need a dumpster. So here we've got my new to me, old and tired 6x10 dump trailer. Today we're going to restore it. This was basically the cheapest functional dump trailer that I could find on Facebook Marketplace on short notice. It needs some wiring, it needs some welding, it needs new sides, a battery, a new coupler, bunch of work. Let's get right into it. So I'm going to start off by putting a battery in this thing. Now I got it, the guy was running it off of a jumper pack, so I grabbed actually an old battery from my Sprinter, and it fit perfectly in the little box so I could test this thing out. What I liked about this was this is a scissor style dump trailer, and I really see the potential it has to be super nice if it just gets kind of cleaned up, gets some higher side, and gets restored. So it's pretty dirty, and I'm going to go ahead and break out some degreaser for this. I'm going to be using the WD-40 brand Specialist Easy Pods. So these you can basically drop into a spray bottle of water, and it creates a concentrated cleaner and degreaser really quickly and easily. And on a project like this, I'm going to be using a lot of degreaser, so to have it in such an efficient package is really useful. Now, this is the original color, and the guy I bought it from actually did a quick flip on it off of Marketplace, and I happened to see the listing before he bought it and know that it basically has only had one owner, which I like about a trailer like this. You know, dump trailers get really abused, and you really don't want something that's like incredibly tired. Now, that being said, the way that this trailer was constructed in the factory, the sides roll down onto the base. So what you've got basically is a situation where when it rains, water has an opportunity to slip between the sides and the floor, and you can see those rust spots on the left and right side, right where that seam is. Now, they don't look like they're too structurally bad, but there's a fair bit of rust there that I want to try to mitigate and really kind of loosen up before I go ahead and use some rust coating primer on this whole thing. Now, I'm using a Pferd knotted wire wheel, and I've got my powered respirator system on, even though I'm working outside. Now, when you kind of wire wheel something like that's this rusty, you're going to be producing a lot of rust and dust that you don't want to necessarily breathe in. So even though I'm outside, I'm going to be using that powered respirator for a lot of this. Now, I wanted to take off the wheels so that I could get a look at the hub. So I'm using some WD-40 Specialist penetrant spray to make sure that those lug nuts will come right off. And then I can go ahead and see what I'm working with over here. Now, this trailer does have brakes on every single hub, and I'm going to be getting into those later on in the video when I go ahead and clean up, re-grease, and redress all the hubs and brakes. For now, I'm just trying to loosen up any loose rust that might be in the way. Now, like I said, when I bought this trailer, I really could see the potential for what it could be. And, you know, you can see it here that in the end, this thing turns out really super nice and is basically looking and driving brand new and functioning so much better with this extended capacity. By adding some higher sides to it and by adding the barn doors that you can see on the back, you're really going to get almost a full 10 yards out of what is only a 6-foot by 10-foot trailer. Now, it's funny, you can actually buy larger trailers for less money in my local area, but because I live in a town which has very tight roads and my property is pretty tight where I'm actually renovating my house, I wanted a smaller trailer that would be a little easier to move around. Now you can see I'm starting to get some primer on this thing, and I'm using the Rust-Oleum Rusty Metal Primer, and normally I really like this paint, but something about this batch of cans I got was pretty problematic, and it kept clogging up, which was a little frustrating. Now I'm deciding to spray here versus roll this paint on because it really helps me get into the nooks and crannies, and this is just going to give me a nice primer surface that I can go ahead and paint with a top coat after the fact. Now again, just kind of going through with the wire wheel and cleaning this up. Now I'm going to be spending a bunch of time cleaning and painting this, and if you want to skip forward in the video to where I start fabricating the parts, you can do so up to about the middle point of the video. You'll be able to find where I start welding and fabricating new parts and new sides and new doors for the back. Now underneath the wheel wells is where I'm going to find the most significant rust other than that kind of seam section. And again, just by cleaning this up with the wire wheel, it's going to go a long way in terms of getting this ready to go. Now, the other kind of hack and trick I like to use is I like to use a pointed wire brush, which is normally used for cleaning welds, and I can clean that stuff up, get into those nooks and crannies, and get that primer on there. This project took up a lot of primer and paint, and even for when I'm painting, I'm wearing that powered respirator unit just because I want to try to keep my exposure to the VOCs and the various dust particles out of my lungs. Now, the way that I'm doing this trailer is a little out of sequence, the way I normally would, and doing all this paint and rust work prior to kind of like doing any of the repair work is weird, but it's just kind of casualty of the temperature and the weather that I'm dealing with. And what you just saw me using there was this little portable sandblaster that you may have seen on my Instagram. It's a little kind of handheld unit that works pretty good, but at the end, it really just was too small to do a trailer like this, so I switched back to the wire wheel. Now, the next tool I'm going to be using here is what's kind of known to me as a hamburger wheel. This is a paint stripping wheel, that blue wheel on my die grinder. This one's made by Pferd Abrasives. It's really good for like stripping stickers and stripping paint. Now, the reason I'm not using this on the whole trailer is because I'm not trying to strip the paint. I'm trying to remove the rust. And the blue wheel works really well for removing those old stickers, which are way too brittle to come off on their own. Now, the lights on this trailer sort of work. They kind of work half the time, but all the rubber gaskets are basically worn out and cracked, so I decided to pull those off, and I'll be replacing those later in the video along with some of the wiring. Now, again, just kind of finishing up with my wire wheeling on the outside, and then I can move to the inside, the bed, which kind of has the most attention needed. I want this to be a really kind of well-prepared surface so that it can hold paint, because it is going to get the most abuse. Now, I was in generally, pretty good shape. It's actually hard to tell if it was ever painted. It may have always been like kind of a raw steel from the factory, probably because they knew it was going to get banged up and, why bother painting it. But I did want to get a coat of paint on it just to sort of keep this metal from being exposed to weather. So the way that I did this was I actually set my little leaf blower up to kind of be blowing air while I'm grinding, which is going to push air away from me. And again, I'm using the power respirator unit to just kind of keep this stuff out of my lungs as I go. Cleaning this up was honestly really easy. Just kind of had to take your time with the wire wheel, and it took me probably half a day to get it all wire wheeled and basically prepped so I could paint it. Now, the nice thing about a dump trailer is it's easy to get the water to run out of it, so I rinsed this out and did a little bit of a scrub so that I could prepare it to prime the inside of the bed. And you can see how it's got kind of low sides, and we're going to fix that by adding some high sides to it a little later on in the video. Now I'm switching to a roll-on primer just so that I can kind of get those larger areas and not use as much spray paint, get a little bit better coverage. So I just ran through with a 6-inch brush and roller and just got this thing primed up as best I could. Now, I probably could have skipped the primer on the already painted areas, but I figured since I had the primer out and this thing was pretty dirty and old, I might as well prime it. Restoring trailers like this is kind of a long and a little bit of a painful process. There's just so many little components and parts that you can get into, and if you're going to do it, it's the kind of thing that you want to just do once. Now, one of the things I've been looking into is a dustless blaster unit, because I would have liked to have sandblasted a lot of this before I painted it, just so that I could kind of be done with it. And if you remember my last trailer restoration video when I did the drop deck trailer, I also didn't have a sandblaster for that and wound up doing a ton of wire wheel and rebuilding work, which it just takes a lot of time and energy. If I can avoid taking some of that time and energy by having a more efficient tool, I'll always do it. So again, priming the inside, making sure that everything is covered, getting sure that I have primer inside any of those kind of nooks and crannies, and getting everything painted and primed up so that we can move forward into the next phase. These little rollers are great, and painting like this on a cold day kind of isn't ideal. Again, like I said, I'm fighting the weather on this project, and unfortunately doing this out of sequence. So normally I would have done any repairs, any welding, and everything else that I needed to do before I would have painted it, but because of the weather, I figured it would be smart to paint everything while it was warm, and then I could always go back and grind some of that paint off to do some welding and touch it up. The last thing I need to strip, wire wheel, and clean up is the back door, and then I can go ahead and prime it. Again, using that stripper wheel to get some of the stickers off, and then I can go ahead and prime and paint this section as well. I don't have anything against the branding on this trailer, but I want the whole thing to look nice and clean and new, so I'm going to be stripping off everything. So now that everything is primed, I can go ahead and also remove some of the hardware, and I can get ready to make the high sides out of some 2x12s. So I measured and let that stuff dry, and then brought these 2x12s in and gave them a coat of some gloss black Rust-Oleum paint. And this is just going to match the rest of the trailer, and it's a nice, thick, oil-based paint that isn't necessarily made for wood, but is going to really protect this wood very well, and it's going to keep it from rotting, even though it's going to be outside 365 days a year. Now, not only did I do the horizontal pieces, but also the stake sections, and you can notice, if you look closely, there are little routed sections that I had to cut out on these as well so that they would fit in the stake pockets. So we are having an unseasonably warm fall, so I was able to work outside in a t-shirt and give this thing a coat of paint after letting that primer dry for a couple of days. And you can see I'm going ahead liberally with some gloss black spray paint and roll-on paint. I'm just going with black because I just like the way it looks, and I think it'll make the whole thing look nice and clean. And I'm going to be painting every part of this, even the axles, and I'm going to be painting the wheel hubs underneath the wheel wells. And my wife decided to come outside on a nice day and give me a hand. I really can't tell you how much I hate painting. And I know a lot of people are going to say that I could have used a sprayer to spray this and maybe it would have gone faster. And that might have been the case, but I just don't have any experience spraying paint. And I like the thickness of a coat that you can get when you roll paint on. It's really easy to tell how thick it is. And then I use my spray painter to get inside some of the nooks and crannies. Now, fast forwarding, the painting is done, and I can go ahead and start doing some fabricating to really soup this thing up. So the first thing I wanted to do was with the stake pockets. If you noticed in that last clip, the stake pockets had no bottom. So when you put your stakes in for your high sides, there's really no way to stop them from sagging. So what I decided to do was go over into the metal shop and fabricate up some little angle brackets so that I could put them on the bottom of the stake pockets and give myself a nice positive stop for them to land on. Now, once I made one and tested it out, I was able to kind of bust through and make a bunch more. And I recently made a video about cheap tools that I actually use, and one of them was this bandsaw. You can see it's really great for this type of fabricating. My big Bailey bandsaw is a little large to be cutting such thin material, and it's just so much faster when you have a small benchtop saw like that. Now, the other really useful tool that I have that's not necessarily as cheap is this Hausfeld bender and my iron worker. So I'm really running through the kind of repetitive process here of making 8 of these brackets, making a little spacer using an engineer square and punching about a 1/4 inch hole in these so that I can put a bolt through them and hold these on to the stakes. Now I'm going to be welding to the original stake pockets, which, like I said, have no bottom. So I just need to go back and grind away some of that fresh paint and give myself a nice area to weld to. Now I'm going to be using my Lincoln Power Mig 215 MPI. This is sort of my outside welder. This is the one that I use anytime I'm outside of the metal shop. And I've got a nice cart that my buddy James made me that can roll out in the gravel driveway. And I use a nice long 220 volt extension cord. But this is kind of one of my favorite site welders as well because it runs off of 110 as well as 220 and can automatically detect the voltage. So now you can see the intention of that stake pocket bottom. This is going to just help me get a lot better of a kind of mount for my sides. And I can go ahead and do this on all the sides of the trailer. Now the process is very simple. I'm basically beveling everything, giving myself an area to weld where there's no paint and nice and clean. And while I am still going to melt some of the paint away from it, the fact that the paint has been ground away in the immediate weld area is going to keep me from getting sort of any contamination that might muddy up my weld puddle or cause any distortion. Now I didn't get any paint on the inside of the stake pockets to begin with, so it's easy enough for me to burn through this. And the thing that you may notice is that I'm wearing another power respirator hood. This is my FGS hood from Lincoln Electric that allows me to have a grinding and welding hood that has the HEPA filter on my back. Now, the reason I'm wearing this, again, even though I'm outside, is because as I am heating this metal and welding it, some of the paint around the weld area is going to melt and it's going to create fumes that I don't want to breathe in. So this is just going to help protect my lungs. And I'm also going to be grinding as I'm welding, as you can see, fixing that crack in the fender. So by having a nice powered respirator unit, you can really get a good look for it here, that you can grind and weld with. You can really protect yourself as best as possible. So I flip up the front section of the hood and I can see the grinding lens, and I can flip down the welding hood when I'm ready to weld. Super convenient, and I've really kind of grown accustomed to using it. And I always find that when I work a long day of welding and grinding, I feel a lot better knowing that I haven't been breathing in smoke and, kind of grinding dust all day after using something like this. So now with those done, I can give those a quick blast of the same gloss black paint and just kind of paint everything that I welded and pull that other stake pocket out. Now, one of the things I'm going to be doing, because I've got a nice warm day, and like I said, I'm working out a sequence, is painting the wheel hubs before I go ahead and mount those sides. Like I said, I'm really trying to take advantage of the weather as best I can, and I want to get everything nicely painted so it's nice and coated and protected from rust and rain as I move forward through this restoration. So now that all that's done, I can go ahead and put these stake pockets in and start putting the high sides on the trailer. Now, I know you might be saying, why would I want to make the trailer harder to get stuff into? But because this is only a 6x10 trailer, it's really only probably about 5 yards of garbage with only the original 24-inch sides. Now, because dumping the trailer is kind of a pain and it takes a lot of time, I want to try to maximize the capacity on this trailer, and that's why adding these high sides is going to be so important. Now, it is going to make getting stuff into the dumpster that much harder, but it's honestly not that bad to kind of heave a garbage pail over your shoulder and get it into the trailer when you need to move something heavy. Likely the heaviest things that are going to go in this are like asphalt shingles or tile, and in that case you just maybe have a little bit lighter of a garbage can so that you can easily get it over the high side. Now, there's one kind of major crack in the back of the frame, and this is probably just from the weight of the door. I noticed that it opens and closes and kind of wallows out when the door is moving, so I decided I would grind that out with an angle grinder, and then I would go ahead and weld that crack back together. Now, this is pretty thin. It's like 3/16 material, so once I had it all ground out down to kind of a root, I was able to put in a pass and then grind it back and do a little bit more welding to get a really nice solid repair on that crack that I can paint over and is not going to affect the functionality of the door in any way. A little bit of paint on top of that and we're good to go. Try to use the heat that's kind of baked into the metal from all that welding to work in my advantage. Now, once I had the sides on, I could measure for what's going to be called barn doors that I'm going to be building for the back. Now, before I get a chance to do that, again, taking advantage of some weather, I'm going to be painting the underside, painting over my axles, getting those nice and cleaned up, and getting the whole bottom side of this trailer nice and clean and painted up well. Now, you'll notice there are spots for ramps, and you may have noticed those in the first couple of clips. I am actually going to be repairing and probably rebuilding the ramps and maybe making them a little bit longer. But for now in this video, I just pulled them out. I'm not really going to be using the ramps on this trailer because I have the drop deck, but eventually I will fix them. The next task to take care of here is the lighting. So a lot of the lights worked, but a couple of them were not functioning well. So I actually found a lighting kit online on Amazon that was the exact same terminal connection as what was already on the trailer. To make sure that those would work well, I used some WD-40 Specialist electric parts cleaner to just clean those terminals and put them into the new light housings, which actually worked really well. And it resolved almost all of the issues by simply just switching out the lights themselves for new units and then running a test light feature off of my truck to make sure everything worked. The only light that had an issue was the light here on the driver side rear. What was happening was the actual running light was working, but the signal light was not working. So I used my multimeter to try to chase that out. And then it led me into this very lovely battery box and wiring box, which is literally just a residential electric wiring box. And there I found a broken wire using my multimeter that was not actually sending a turn signal power to that light. So originally I wasn't going to rewire this to a new 7-pin plug, but after seeing the way these wires were just sort of in this metal box, I decided that if I was going to do this, I should do it right. And I labeled all my wires after tracing out where they went, and I smashed this box off the trailer. Now, this thing was literally welded to the frame, and there was no good way to get to those welds except for just kind of hammering my way through it with a chisel, a hammer, and an angle grinder. Now, with that done, I was able to start putting my terminal connections on that would go into my new 7-pin terminal block. And for that, I'm using this little mini heat gun that I got online. This is a Butane Iroda butane soldering iron and heat gun. And let me tell you, if you use those kind of wet location connectors and you try to use a regular heat gun, this little thing is so much faster. It really made this process super easy. And you'll see I actually left the labels on my wires for future use. Here I'm actually putting in a new breakaway. So this came with a breakaway that was wired into the dumping hydraulic battery. And while that's great, I like to have a dedicated battery for my breakaway box. And here I'm actually testing it. My buddy James is running the wheel, and then I'm pulling the breakaway pin out to make sure it works. Now, the reason I like that dedicated breakaway is just because it's guaranteed that it's going to work as long as that battery is charged versus running it off of your dump battery, which could be dead from kind of moving things up and down. So with all that lighting and wiring done, I'm going to be adding in some little kind of wooden blocks for the doors that I'm going to be building, and also wooden blocks for the tarp that's going to go on the top. Now I painted these and I glued them on with some PL, and then I can start to fabricate these doors. Now, the way I have to do these doors is with a pin hinge that's going to be offset. So I kind of designed this sort of offset angle piece. And once I kind of sort of test fit it, I can make a couple of them. I need to make 4. And then I can mark out some locations that I could punch and drill some holes so that I could mount these to those blocks that I just put in. Just using a spring-loaded center punch, and then I'll run over to the iron worker to punch these holes, which this could easily have been done on the drill press, but I really like to do it on the iron worker and use the iron worker as much as I possibly can because it's just so fast. You can also very easily transfer marks using just sort of a Sharpie when you have this sort of layout where you can mark from both sides. Then I can go ahead onto the drill press and use a countersink to make sure that these screws will sit nice and flush. I'm using this new vise from Fine. This is the Fine MagForce 150, the VersaMag 150 vise. And this thing has a really nice kind of magnetic base. So I have it up on some magnetic blocks in that other clip, but it's a really great vise to have on your drill press if you're looking for one that's safe and really fast to use. Now the pin hinges I bought from Amazon are ball bearing pin hinges. They're relatively small. I think they have a 1/2-inch pin, but the way that they're designed, they always need like an offset of some kind in order to work. So I had some 3/8 material kicking around. I'm just going to be cutting some little blocks, and you'll see how those come into play in just a second. So the pin hinge itself can be welded to that plate just kind of flush. And I'm going to be using some fixture blocks to kind of line everything up and some of my table clamps. And, welding this 1/4-inch plate to this 1/8 inch, I just have to make sure I concentrate my heat properly. But the whole thing with these is they aren't really designed to work out of the box as far as I've seen. You always have to do some sort of modification and some sort of spacing with these types of hinges, but they are pretty solid, and for what they cost, it's definitely easier than kind of making your own from scratch with sort of the fabricating that would go involved with that. So after welding these up, you can see I'm kind of welding all 4 sides just to try to basically keep water from getting into them. I can move on to actually the way I'm going to weld the pin section. So normally I would have the pin section on the wall side of a door so that the pins were there permanently, not the sockets. But in this case, I'm actually going to be doing the opposite, and I'm going to have the sockets on the downside. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to be able to remove these doors, and because they have ball bearings in the hinges, I want to make sure that the balls don't fall out every single time I take the doors off. Now, it will obviously give an opportunity for water to sit inside the cup of the hinge, but there's going to be a lot of grease in there, and I don't really think it's going to be much of an issue. So now to actually make the doors for the back of the trailer, and to do that, I'm going to be using some 16 gauge 1-inch by 1-inch square tube, and I'll show you some tricks on how I cut this material to really get it done in a very efficient way. So obviously I have a big bandsaw, but you can at least do 2 of these on pretty much any saw. And I'm gang cutting my miters because every piece needs a miter on one end, and it doesn't really matter where it is in relation to the other end. And once you have that cut, you can actually mark out your other miters, and if you draw them kind of precisely enough with a 45-degree speed square, you can actually gang cut both sides of the job. So what I'm doing is basically marking out all my pieces and aligning them, and then gang cutting all 4 again. So basically, it's just 2 saw operations to get 4 mitered pieces of material that are an accurate length. And that really saves you a lot of time. So now I'm just fixturing everything out and sort of blocking and jigging everything up on the table. I did wind up with a little bit of a gap because I had mismeasured, so I had a little bit of a gap that I had to fill, which is no problem when you have a table like this. This is a Sigmund 5x10 table. I've really enjoyed using it, and when you set up sort of fixture blocks around it, you can basically guarantee that it's going to work and get you the exact same result every single time. You can make multiples of the same kind of shape if you just set up and leave your fixtures in place. You can see they're stacked on top of each other, the 2 doors that I made, and this is just a really efficient way to build things, especially in the metal shop. The next thing to do is build the sort of diagonal piece. This is going to be, like I keep saying, a barn door style door. So I'm going to need to kind of cut in a weird miter in the corners and then wedge these pieces in and weld them. These are going to be pivoted out from the bottom of the hinge side so that they can hold the weight of the door and keep them from sagging. And this is going to help because this material being so thin is going to need a little bit of extra support in order to actually hold itself up. Now, I went with a thin material like this because I really didn't want to have a ton of additional weight on the wooden sidewalls. And the 16 gauge material is really strong still. It's obviously not as heavy duty as something thicker, but with the diagonal brace and the wire mesh that we're going to be welding onto it in a couple of minutes, it's going to really make for a strong door that's really not going to have any ability to sag on its own, and it'll be more that the sidewalls of the trailer flex before this door actually bends. So now you can see I'm actually going to be using the other side of the hinge, call it the female side of the hinge, to speak to where I'm going to weld the male side of the hinge onto these doors. Now you'll notice I'm wearing that Papr unit inside the shop as well. Again, there is paint on these hinges. I want to just kind of keep myself from breathing in any additional smoke. And I've got my kind of fume extractor running above me, which is also going to help keep any smoke out of my lungs. Now that those are jigged in place and they are tacked, I can go ahead and fully weld them. And it kind of turns into a dog's breakfast here with a bunch of those welds stacked up. But once everything's grounded, painted, it's going to look really good. And I can weld the top of that and keep these things nice and secure, keep the rain out of them. And with a little bit of grinding on the hinges and grinding on the back side of the hinge, they'll actually be able to move basically 270 degrees around the side of the trailer. Now these hinges have a grease fitting, which is really nice, and I take those out prior to painting these just with the same gloss black Rust-Oleum spray paint, just getting everything nice and well coated so it will stand up to the elements and not immediately start flash rusting. With all that done, I can actually mount the doors, and you'll be able to see kind of where I was getting at with these. And the way that these hinges are designed is that they stick out the side of the trailer, and by having them stick out the side of the trailer, it allows these doors to pivot all the way around and go almost flat with the raised sidewall. Now, because the sidewalls aren't perfectly square, I had a little bit of trouble getting the doors to align properly, which was frustrating. You can see the way that they're like not even close. So it took me a couple of tries to get these things to really sort of align well and not look totally stupid like they do right now. It took a little bit of shimming. I had to add some aluminum and stainless steel shims behind the bottom sides of the hinges to sort of block everything out. But eventually I got it, and I'm really happy with the fitment. You can see they're nice and aligned, they're nice and square, and they have a really even gap between the bottoms of the doors and the bottom of the door of the trailer itself. Now you can see where I'm getting at with these doors. They're basically going to allow me to get the full 6 foot by 10 foot by 4 foot tall dumpster size out of this whole can. Now, according to calculators online, that's going to give me about 9 to 10 yards of garbage, which is great considering it's a relatively small footprint. And if I can have my own basically 10-yard dumpster, it's going to make the renovation of my house just so much easier. So I'll be able to cart my own trash to the local processing plant, which is only about 2 miles from my house. Now, this is some expanded sheet metal that I actually bought for the ramp project that I did like 3 or 4 years ago. And you'll notice it's pretty red with rust. That's just because it's been sitting outside for, I think, 4 years. It's still in good shape. It's still usable. I've almost thrown it out probably 4 or 5 times, and I'm really glad I didn't because it's going to be absolutely perfect for this application. That being said, before I weld anything up, I am going to go ahead and try to blast some of that rust off. I'm using a Pferd cup wheel. This is a carbon cup wire wheel, and this is going to be able to run right over that rust, and it's going to really remove a lot of it. You can see just how much dust there is in the air from that process. Now, before I go ahead and weld the wire mesh to the doors, I just take a Victograin kind of fast grinding disc, get everything cleaned up, get all those welds ground down flat, and I can go ahead and clamp these to the table, and I can start the process of welding up the doors. Now, I'm going to be adding a lot of heat to one side of this, and I really want to make sure that I don't warp these, so I wanted to make sure that I did a good job clamping these down, and then I'm going to go ahead and weld the wire mesh to the actual tube. Now, this is, I think, 16 or maybe 14 gauge wire mesh, so it's pretty thin, and this is only 16 gauge tubing. So I have my machine set pretty low, and in order to kind of avoid any warping or burning, I'm really just jumping around and doing a lot of very small tack welds. The other thing I'm kind of concerned with is I really don't want to leave any sharp metal edges that could potentially stick out and get caught on something when you're trying to load or unload the dumpster. So I wanted to weld over all of the little locations where the ends of the wire mesh were sticking out. You can see all those tiny little tack welds. And while they're not so nice looking, it's going to just make sure that nobody's kind of shirt or jacket gets caught on anything, or maybe their hand gets cut, because you don't want to get cut by a rusty metal door when you're loading or unloading a trailer. Now this really stiffened up the door and it turned out really nice. And now the next task is to make some sort of a lock to keep those doors from opening up on you. Now I had some 3/4 inch tube with an 1/8 wall, which would give me basically a 1/2 inch ID. And then I could use some 1/2 inch bar to make sort of like a Cremone bolt that would lock the doors in place. Now I sort of racked my brain on how I could get these doors to lock in a way that would be kind of elegant, but also kind of keep them from rattling. And while I thought of a couple options, drilling out and making my own sort of locking system, I thought was the best way to move forward. So I drilled these out 1/32 over a 1/2 inch. So that would have been 17/32 drill bit inside this tube. And by having that, I just have a little bit more room for my Cremone bolt. And you'll see kind of the design of this in just a second when you kind of look at the doors. So you hang the doors back on the trailer. Make sure you hang them on the right side with the mesh facing in. You can see how well those ball bearing hinges work. The doors just want to glide open. And then basically what I'm going to be doing here is putting a slide bolt that goes down right onto the tailgate of the trailer. And that's going to allow me to lock these in place and keep them from rattling, keep them from opening up in any way. Now there's this piece of sort of press brake material that's kind of on the top, I think is a stiffener for the door. We're going to be cutting out a little pie shape out of that, which will give somewhere for the tube to nest in nicely and give me a nice area to weld. And again, this sort of out of sequence. Normally, I would have loved to have done all this fabricating work before the trailer was painted, but because of the weather right now when I'm filming this, it's probably about 25 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So it's definitely not painting weather, even though I am going to be doing some touch-up. But I'm glad I wasn't painting the whole trailer on these really cold days and just doing these little touch-ups and welds. So now you can really kind of understand the way that the door is going to lock. I have that bolted, that tube welded to the tailgate, and then another tube welded to the door on the top and on the bottom. And then in a couple of minutes, I'm going to bend over the top to give it sort of a handle. And you can see now the door is nice and secured, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to rattle. It's not going to move while you're driving down the road. Once I knew that it was going to work, I could go past the tacks and I can really weld a nice heavy bead on there, because when this thing is loaded with garbage, you're going to want something nice and strong that's not going to just pop open and leave garbage flying down the road. I can do the exact same thing on the other side, which went a little smoother. The big kind of tricky part here was aligning all 3 of those pins so that there wasn't any resistance on the actual rod. And I'm got to say, I'm really happy with the way it worked out. It didn't give me any resistance. I mean, it's not super easy to close, but it's not hard either. And I think it'll wear itself in a little bit over time and work even better. I'm going to add a couple of drops of oil to those bars as well, which is going to help. Now, I actually have to fabricate the pins. And the way I'm going to do that first is I'm going to cut them to length, and then I'm going to just take a drill and chuck them up with some 120 grit sandpaper, and just sort of clean up any of the mill scale that's on the outside, any burrs. Then I'm going to mark a 6-inch line. I put a little strike mark in with a chisel, and then I'm using the induction heater to heat up in a very isolated section of the bar so that I can put it in the vise and bend it over so I can have a nice handle. It's a super simple way to make handles, and then I'm going to go ahead and add those in. Now, one of the things I realized I wanted kind of while I was finishing up this process was sort of a little kickstand for the bottom of the door so that the doors didn't have an opportunity to sag when they were in the closed position. Now, it's a little detail, but I really think it's going to help with the overall kind of health of the sidewalls. There's not going to be any opportunity for the doors to sag. And all I did was put a little plastic tube cap end in the bottom as almost like a little wear plate so that they can sit nice on top of the tailgate. And what was good was when I was measuring for these pieces, they were both pretty much exactly 2 inches, and it gave me confidence that these doors actually were straight and square with that tailgate on the trailer. Now you can see the slide bolts in place, and you can see the way they work. They just kind of pop down, and once I have those little plastic things on the bottom, just a super nice, well-locked way to keep those doors from swinging and opening up. Now, the only thing I wanted to add to this was I wanted to grind a little sort of like dugout for the handles for the chrome bolts to sit in. So I just used my angle grinder with a cutoff wheel on it, and then my die grinder with a little Pferd carbide burr, and that just gives the handle somewhere to go so that they can't spin out. And what I'm eventually going to do is just put a little chain with 2 clips on it just as a safety so that the doors can't open while you're driving. Now these pieces are rusty. Clearly the expanded metal was, so I'm using the rusty metal primer again, this time outside with the spray can, just to sort of get these things primed, and then I'll leave them inside for a day or two to cure before I paint them with the actual gloss black paint. While those are drying, I wanted to work on the little toolbox in the front. So originally when I bought this was just an open vessel with some expanded metal on the bottom. And the idea is that you'd put, like bungee cords or straps in here, but I want something that's actually going to be secure that I can use to carry straps or a tarp or anything else. So I decided I would take some scrap diamond plate and make a door. Now this is a super simple process, basically just measured for it, and I'm going to be cutting it up with the Milwaukee metal cutting circular saw. And this is like a perfect application for that saw. This is 3/16 diamond plate. It's pretty heavy, and it's not the kind of thing you want to be cutting with an angle grinder. But when you cut it with a metal cutting circular saw, be this one or any of the other circular saws on the market, it's like cutting plywood. I love fabricating steel with a metal cutting saw like this. It literally brings me back to my days as a carpenter, but it's just so nice to be able to be fabricating in steel with such ease because it's just, steel is forever. So the other thing I needed to add to this, the C-channel on that back side doesn't go all the way to the bottom of the door, and I wanted to make sure nothing could fall out easily, so I welded on these plates. My one regret here is that they are facing in different directions. I misjudged the cope, and this was the material I had, so nobody's going to see it but you and I. The next thing I did was weld on some more barrel hinges. These are going to just allow this door to open and close. And then I'm going to be welding on a little latch that's going to kind of just have a very simple hole that I can either put a lock or just another pin through to keep the doors from opening up while I'm driving down the road. It's a very simple door design. It was easy to do, easy to execute, and it's going to be super secure. Plus that 3/16 diamond plate is thick enough that you can easily stand on it and use it as a step to get stuff into the can. Now the only other thing to do was to cut a little access port so that my 7-pin wire could sneak through. And there's another reason why I have my 7-pin wire in that toolbox is if I wanted to put a lock on this, I could actually have the other end of my 7-pin inside the toolbox so that if somebody wanted to try to steal the trailer, they'd have to, just go through one more deterrent. They'd have to break the lock to try to get to the 7-pin to have access to the brakes and the lights and stuff. Now, once everything has a little bit of time to cure and dry, the primer on everything, I gave it another coat of that paint, and then I had primed and painted over the areas where I had welded those pins on the tailgate. Next thing I wanted to do is add in a spare tire mount. I really think it's important that anytime you're towing a trailer that you have a spare tire with you. It's kind of the make or break for your day if you are towing and you get a nail, especially with a dump trailer where you're going to be driving in and out of a recycling center and have many opportunities to drive over nails or other, kind of road hazards. So I just got a mount on Amazon, and I bought a spare tire and wheel on Amazon as well and put that on there. And the other thing I wanted to change was the trailer jack. So I like a trailer jack that has an expandable foot so that you can more easily kind of drop it quickly. So I found this Vevor one on Amazon. It's also just going to work a little bit faster and better than the one that came on it. And it's going to allow me to avoid using that block every time I want to put the trailer down. So I had to use the original welded bolts, which was fine. Got that thing on there, and you can see very quickly I can lower it down and drop the foot so I don't have to actually crank it the whole way. I also painted the chains just because they are welded to the trailer and I didn't feel like replacing them, and they are in good shape. The next thing is to replace the actual trailer coupler. That's one of those kind of sheet metal ones, and while it seemed fine, I like to replace these with a nice heavy duty cast one. This one again came from Amazon. It's got a little easier of a lock to operate. And I like that it has the pin already chained to it. Came with some nice grade 8 bolts. I can get everything nice and tight, and it looks really good on the front of the trailer being brand new. I also changed my breakaway wire to a bungee style wire, which is just a little bit better. Now, everything being painted and done, I can put the doors back on at the rear. You can see how nice those came out. And it really helps with sort of the scale of the back of the trailer. Next thing to do is actually to paint and clean up the wheels. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a mistake that I noticed here. Now, I had looked at my rims and tires when I bought this, and I don't know what I was thinking, but the rims and tires didn't look that bad. The rims obviously are fine, but the tires looked okay. Now, upon further inspection, and I really only noticed it while I was painting this rim, this tire is totally shot. It's got a bunch of cracks in the sidewall, and it's totally dry rotted. Now, I priced out buying new tires. I figured if I'm going to buy one, I might as well buy all of them. And believe it or not, it was actually almost the same price to just buy a whole new set of rims with tires mounted and balanced, delivered to my door, than it was to just buy 4 tires. So I went ahead and did that, and they won't be coming till probably after this video gets released. But just know I'll be changing out the tires and rims for brand new ones. Now, the next kind of due diligence piece I needed to do here was actually take apart the hubs and re-grease everything and make sure that the brakes looked good and that the pads weren't cracked or anything like that. So I took the hubs off, I took the bearings out, I kind of checked everything. I hooked up my grease gun to make sure that the Easy Lube axles actually work and the grease paths are free. And then just, got everything greased up and cleaned. The brakes are in pretty good shape, but I'm going to be using that WD-40 degreaser to just clean everything, clean the insides of the rims, clean the insides of the hubs, make sure everything is nice and clean, free of debris and dust and grease, just to have a good braking experience here. Now, I'm going to be using this little wheel bearing packer tool that I got on Amazon. It's called the Kraken. And it's interesting. It's not like a traditional bearing packer. It actually has like a screw that you screw down, and it basically forces the grease up through the needle bearing. And it worked pretty good. It's kind of like a little cumbersome, and the thing naturally gets completely covered in grease, which is kind of annoying to clean. I don't know if I'll just pack bearings the old-fashioned way with my palm of my hand. But it did, kind of make the process a little more streamlined. Anyway, putting this sort of king bolt back on and then putting in my anti-roll pin. It's very important that you reinstall this pin. It's the only thing keeping your wheel hub from falling off the axle, and getting it aligned can be a little bit tricky. Now, with that all done, I kind of added some more grease to the cap and put the cap back on, and then I had a new little kind of plastic end piece, a little plastic cap that would keep these hubs nice and protected. Overall, I was pretty happy with the condition of the hubs and the brake systems on this trailer. I was worried they would be in worse shape, but I did test drive it and test run the brakes, and everything seemed to work well. So it's a relief that I don't have to go do a full set of brakes on this, because it's a lot of work to replace all those brakes and replace all that wiring. Now I can mount the wheels back on, and like I said, I already ordered new wheels and tires, but I did get new lug nuts, and I'll use those. I like to switch the lug nuts for brand new ones. Again, it's just one less thing that could fail when you've got a bunch of weight in this thing. You want to eliminate any opportunities for accidents to happen. Now you can see why I put those blocks on the front of the trailer. Here is the retractable canopy. This is required by DOT that you cover your load, whatever it is, to keep debris off the road. And the next thing I'm going to be adding is some reflective tape for just for visibility, especially towing a black trailer like this. If I'm towing it at night, it makes my already really long vehicle that much longer, and I want to make sure people see it and know that it's coming down the road, especially when I'm making a turn. Now, the critical thing when you're putting on reflective tape like this is that you roll the tape with a rubber J roller. It's really kind of the only way that you get good adhesion out of stuff like this. So if you're going to be doing this, make sure you add that in there. The last thing I had forgotten when I was doing the wiring was to add this little license plate light, which was super easy. And then one more creature comfort that I wanted to add was some D-rings to the inside of the can. Now, I originally thought about welding these in, but because the walls of this trailer are really only like 3/16 thick, I thought it would be smarter to actually do a bolt-through D-ring. Now, I found these on Amazon. I think they're 10,000-pound D-rings. They're a half-inch bar. And the way they work is you've got some bolts that bolt in through one side, and you've got these nice 1/4-inch plates on either side that allow you to have like a really good purchase to bolt things to, which is going to just kind of keep things from sucking in and bending and potentially breaking. you can see the system there. You've got the D-ring on the inside, and then you've got these bolts on the outside. Once they were in, I could cut them off, and this trailer is done. I'm super happy with how it came out. I'm really, really happy with the way that it looks. The functionality of it is great, and it was when I bought it. It's just that much better now. Everything's been maintained, everything's been serviced. This trailer was built in 2007, so it's definitely had some life to it. I'm really happy that I have it, and I'm really happy that I am done with this process. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there are any questions you have, please leave them down below. Thank you so much, WD-40 brand, for sponsoring this video. And if you want to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, follow me right here at Make Everything Shop on Instagram. See you on the next one.